All right, thank you, everybody. First, I want to thank the selectmen for organizing and enabling our consultants that are here today, Beals and Thomas consultants, Jerry Preble and John Gelrick, to be here. They're going to present a discussion about 40Bs to give us a foundation to work from. They're going to speak for about 30 minutes. And then after that, the planning board's going to present some perspectives specific to Sherburne and really look forward to you all for input and for discussion. And I really want to thank everybody for being so incredibly quiet. And I look forward to discussion that's as polite and patient. So thank you, everybody. I want to turn it over to Jerry and John from Beals and Thomas. And again, their discussion is a foundation background. It's intended to be information for us. It's not specific to the project we just talked about. They heard it also for the first time. So we're not going to try to steer the conversation towards that specific project, but rather give us some foundation. Then the planning board's got a few slides to look at where Sherburne is now and to make that a real interactive discussion. We really look forward to folks' input. So, Jerry, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks very much. I appreciate it. And just as an introduction, my name is Jerry Preble. I'm the president of Beals and Thomas. We're a land planning firm based in Southborough, Massachusetts. And we're here on behalf of the town, but the work is funded by Mass Housing. And we've assisted several municipalities with similar services as well. And this program tonight is really intended to provide a context for the projects that may be before the board with regard to the 40B comprehensive permit application process and such. And with me is John Gelstich from our office. John is a certified planner, and he'll go through the process, and I believe we'll be here for questions after the planning board presentation as well. So, John, if you want to take it away.
Hi, I'm John. Can everyone hear me? Get this microphone all set up right. All right, so I usually stand up during these things, but I was told I need to speak into the microphone, so that's not going to happen. So apologize if I'm a little fidgety. So the comprehensive permit, just going to be a little background. It was enacted in 1969, so it's not really a new thing. Chapter 40B are the actual laws, and then 760 CMR 56 is regulations. That kind of outlines all the details about it. So what it does is it allows for affordable housing to be built with some zoning and other regulations waived if need be. And it's mostly geared towards people with 80% area median income, and that changes based on where you are on the state. Right now in Sherburne, we're in the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy HMFA. So 80% of that income limit would be, for one person, about $51,000. Two people, $58,000, and for four people, about $73,000. That includes kids. So a single mother with a child would have to make less than $58,000 to be able to get this affordable housing, as an example. So what the 40B regulations allow is for ZBAs to approve housing permits, housing developments under a streamlined process, as long as the affordable units meet a certain criteria and they are deeded as affordable for a certain amount of time, 30 years being the minimum. A lot of these are done in perpetuity. The town usually requires that so that they don't lose those units and they can be affordable as long as they are units. The state has mandated that 10% of all housing units need to be affordable in a town. If they are not 10%, then there is a critical need for housing in that region, affordable housing in that region. And most towns have not met the 10%. So, as you can tell, there's a critical need for housing, especially in the Boston region. As of December 2014, and these numbers are going to change, they get updated every 2 years. These numbers are going to change in December, so it's not going to, I don't know how much affordable housing Sherborne has added since 2014, but they're at 2.3% right now. So I just listed a couple similar sized communities and where they're at. So Sherborne's not really that far off from other similar sized communities. And then you can get exemptions for meeting short-term goals, which is safe harbor. We're going to go over that in a little bit, so I won't go into detail now. So what the comprehensive permit does is it empowers the ZBA to grant pretty much most local permits all in one process. And that way the developer can streamline the permitting process. They don't have to go through all these different boards, go through all these different reviews. The ZBA takes into account all of the board's comments in a certain period, and then they address those comments in one hearing process. Not necessarily one meeting, but one hearing process. The comprehensive permit does not, however, waive the building permit, state permits, Title V, building code, that type of thing. So there is still, after the ZBA grants a comprehensive permit, there is still some review that needs to go on. Another thing, and I don't know how applicable this is, but if the proposed development takes place in local jurisdictional areas for wetlands, so buffer areas, that type of thing, the ZBA can grant those permits. However, if it is proposing to get into actual wetland state jurisdictional areas, they need to go before the Conservation Commission to hear the state jurisdictional wetland notice of intent.
So the state conservation commission or
The local Conservation Commission hears it for the state, on behalf of the state. That's still the same process as normal, but you don't get to go before the ZBA for that.
Could you explain that one more time? So if it's wetlands.
Yep. So you have local jurisdictional areas and state jurisdictional areas.
Right.
The local bylaw will say 50 feet from a bordering vegetated wetland is a jurisdictional area. The state doesn't say that. The state only says the area that is the bordering vegetated wetland is a jurisdictional area. So if a development is built in the 50-foot area, buffer zone, it can get heard before the ZBA. If it's within the 50-foot buffer zone and the actual jurisdictional bordering vegetated wetland, the buffer zone part gets heard by the ZBA under the local part. But then the the Sherborne Conservation Commission hears the NOI for the actual jurisdictional BVW.
John, sorry, Neil Kessler. I sit on the Conservation Commission as well. In the Wetlands Protection Act, the buffer zone is jurisdictional.
The
So,
local Wetlands Protection Act.
no, state. The 100-foot buffer zone is jurisdictional.
Yeah, the 100-foot buffer is.
So even if there's a local bylaw related to buffer zones, that part is something that the ZBA can waive or not waive. But
Yes.
if they're working within 100 feet of a wetland, they still have to do an NOI at the
Right,
state level
yeah.
through the Conservation Commission.
That's correct.
All right. So the subsidized housing inventory is where all these units are counted. And like I said, those get updated every 2 years. So it's maintained by the DHCD at the state level. And the total housing units are based off of each decennial census. So they were updated for the 2010. They're going to get updated in 2020. So if you were to say, be on the verge of, you meet it in 2019, and then you have more housing units in 2020 according to the census, you may not meet your 10% anymore. So you just need to keep an eye on that. Make sure you're keeping up with the 10% if you get to that point. And then individual communities are responsible for reporting, and that's all kind of details. So how the units are counted. In homeownership units, 25% needs to be sold to 80% AMI or below. For rental units, at least 25% need to be rented to those with 80% or below, or you can do 20% at 50% or below. So less units, fewer units for a more affordable price. And units must be restricted for at least 30 years, usually in perpetuity on the town's behalf. And then there's other financial things that I won't go into too much detail about right now, but restricting profits and that type of thing. So only affordable units for homeownership developments are counted towards the SHI. All units for rental developments are counted towards the SHI, affordable and non-affordable market rate. So if you had a 100-unit development, 25% are affordable, you count the 100 units on the SHI, not just the 25, as long as it's rental. If it's home ownership, you only count those 25 units. So it helps meet your 10%, even if you're adding a lot of units, but fewer affordable units. So the abilities of the ZBA are to waive other local requirements, like we talked about with the Concom. Work with the applicant before and during the process. They can meet in private. No decisions can be made. They have to follow open meeting laws. They need to make everything public, but it can be done. There's just rules that they need to follow. The ZBA can require by a vote that the consultant hire or pay fees for the consultant on the town's behalf. So if an engineering firm or a traffic firm or anything like that was required to review the consultant's work, the consultant would pay for that, not the town. And the ZBA cannot address matters that are not within the authority of the ZBA and are within the authority of the subsidizing agency, project funding eligibility, and project eligibility. That is all done before the project actually comes before the board. So the board can't review that, or they can't make a decision based on that information. So the quick process is the applicant applies for a project eligibility letter. That's usually to Mass Housing, MHP, DHCD, or Mass Development. Those are the 4 subsidizing agencies. Once that they get a project eligibility letter, they submit an application to the ZBA, and that officially starts the clock. ZBA notifies local departments, boards, committees. They get comments from them. ZBA opens up the hearings. They talk about it. You have 180 days to talk about it. It can be extended by written authority of the developer, which usually happens if there's an extenuating circumstance. The ZBA then issues a decision, and the applicant can either apply for a building permit or appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee if they get denied or they don't like the conditions. So this is just kind of a general timeline. I won't spend too much time going over it, but you can see there are certain set days in between that need to be followed. This is at the end too, so during questions I can leave this up. So this is just kind of a general timeline to see how it would play out. We made up November 1st. There was no application before the board. It was just a close date that was easy to calculate. So say a hearing was open on November 1st. The halfway point would be February 1st. The hearing needs to be closed by May 1st, unless the applicant provides written authority to allow for it to go on a little bit longer. And there's a date certain set in that written consent. The ZBA needs to render a decision by June 12th. That's 40 days after the close of the public hearing. And the decision needs to be filed with the town clerk on June 26th. And then the applicant files with the HAC by July 17th if they want to. So basically, if they were to file on November 1st, this would be wrapped up by July of next year, unless there was an extension. So the ZBA has really 3 options. They can approve the development as presented. They can approve the development with conditions. The conditions need to address matters of local concern, and we'll go into detail a little bit later about what that is. Or they can deny the application. And so if the town has not met the state statutory minima, which we'll also go into detail about, the applicant can appeal to the HAC on the conditions, and they can appeal the denial. So right now, just quick aside, Sherborne has not met any of the statutory minimum or state safe harbor, but we'll go into detail about that a little bit later. So there's some definitions, and these are actually pulled from the regulations, so they have meaning behind them. I won't go into any more detail about that, but anyway, so consistent with local needs means the conditions imposed on the project can be considered reasonable when weighed against the state-established regional need for affordable housing. That's the 10%. If you haven't met the 10%, the state has deemed that there is a need for affordable housing. It's not an argument. Local concern means protect health and safety of the occupants and the residents around, natural environment, and promoting better site and building design and preserving open space. This needs to be weighed against, I'm going to say this again, needs to be weighed against the need for affordable housing. So it needs to be a significant local concern for the HAC to uphold a condition that will basically reduce the amount of affordable housing proposed. There's a balancing test, and it's very highly favored in favor of affordable housing. So the statutory minima, and I'm going to gloss over this pretty quickly because the board had asked just a quick overview. It's 10% of total housing units. Sherborne has not met that, but there's going to be talk about how they can meet that. SHI eligible housing exists on 1.5% of the land area. This has been a more popular option as of late. There's a couple groups working right now to figure out a protocol of how to establish this through GIS. There have been, I believe, 2 or 3 applications that have gone before the HAC about this, and they have been denied. I believe Newton and Stoneham are the 2. And Newton has done 2 of those applications. And the application before the ZBA would result in construction of HHI eligible housing on sites comprising more than 0.3% of the town's land area or 10 acres in 1 calendar year. That is not a very common thing to go with either. So safe harbor is a little bit more achievable. And there's a couple of these. So the municipality has achieved some of the statutory minima. That hasn't happened. Those are the ones we just talked about. DHCD has certified the municipality's compliance with the goals of the approved housing production plan. Sherborne does not have one. I believe there's going to be talk about how to create one and introduce one. The municipality has made recent progress towards statutory minima. That has not happened in Sherborne. Project is a large project. There is potential for that based on some of the projects that are in discussion right now. Won't go into too much detail about that, so we don't talk about the projects in detail, but there is potential for that. And a related application has been received. That's basically an application, if somebody were to propose a 100-unit market rate subdivision on a piece of land, and then they then get denied and go around and do a 40B application on the same plot of land within a year. It's a related application. So, in a little bit more detail about the safe harbor, statutory minima, we've established that has not been met. The housing production plan, that's something that Sherborne's going to look into, and what they can do is, once that's been certified, one of the goals is to create SHI eligible units by more than or equal to 0.5% of the production goal. So the production goal established in the HPP, and if you meet 0.5% of that in 1 calendar year, you get certified as meeting safe harbor for a year. I believe if it's 1%, it's 2 years that you get certified, where you can then deny any 40B applications without the applicant going to the HAC. Progress towards the statutory minima, I can let you read that. I don't think you want to hear me read that out loud. And then the large project is in Sherborne, anything over 90 units. That's 6% of the total housing units. In a related application, we talked about that. So the one that's the closest for Sherborne to meet is the large project, because there are some projects that have been talked about that are close to that. I won't go into detail about them, but that is the closest one, I believe, aside from the HPP, that Sherborne is looking at. So crafting conditions is one of the most important and difficult parts, because you really need to craft a condition that is defensible in front of the HAC. So the conditions really need to deal with ensuring the health welfare of the residents. And the HAC is the final authority on the conditions. So some example conditions that have gone before the HAC have been, and these are all from one project in Norwell. So the project had one access drive, a very long access drive, and it's longer than allowed by zoning. The ZBA put conditions limiting that drive due to concerns that emergency services would not be able to reach this development if a tree were to fall on the road or the road were to get washed out or something like that. So that was upheld because of the safety of the residents was of concern. They didn't have a secondary access to this subdivision. So that was upheld. Another one that I like to include is that the ZBA required that all plant species used in landscaping were native. That was upheld. Doesn't seem like it's really important, but it did. The applicant and developer did not prove that upholding that condition would render the project uneconomic. So the HAC said it stands. And then one thing that was struck by the HAC is installation of water quality monitoring wells. So the HAC said the ZBA didn't provide a valid local concern outweighing the need for affordable housing. The water quality wasn't shown to be of significant detriment to the development, by the development. And so it would have been onerous for the applicant to put in these monitoring wells. So the HAC said they are required to follow federal and state drinking water requirements, but the monitoring wells were not required of the developer.
Town water or wells?
It's town water.
It's town water. So the HAC, as I said, is the head authority on this. And these are the burden of proof that both the ZBA and the applicant need to provide before a hearing in the HAC. So the applicant needs to prove that the project is eligible, the conditions render the project uneconomic. I'll go into detail about what they use as criteria for uneconomic a little bit later. And the local requirements were not applied to the development as they are applied to other projects that might not be subsidized. So if there were a market rate development of similar size, the ZBA didn't give the same conditions, same type of conditions to that project. The ZBA has burden of proof saying the decision was consistent with local needs. There's a valid local concern outweighing the housing needs, and the condition is due to the adequacy of municipal services, that type of thing. Another condition I actually usually talk about being not really meeting local concern is, because you hear this surprisingly a lot, if the building will shadow sidewalks during the winter, so there might be a collection of ice on the sidewalk creating a hazard for pedestrians, that is not a valid local concern to the HAC. It's surprising how much you actually hear that. I think I've heard that in two different developments. It's something that you'd think would be local concern because it's the health and safety, but they deem it not as impactive on local health and safety as the need for affordable housing. Just something to keep in mind about that. So then the HAC, after they've heard both sides, will render a decision vacating the denial and directing the ZBA to issue the comprehensive permit, removing certain conditions, modifying conditions, or upholding the decision. And they can go on a condition-by-condition basis. So they can uphold the decision and then have the ZBA modify or strike certain conditions. So the first point is basically the applicant has the ability to bring any conditions or the denial before the HAC if the town has not met statutory minima. And that's the 10% housing unit, 1.5% of land area, or the 0.3% of the third one. And then the applicant has this other burden of proof. I won't go into detail about that. ZBA has burden of proof. It's a little bit more detail of what we talked about before, but this is something we can go into a little bit more detail during the process if this looks like it might happen. So as I said, I cannot say this word tonight, uneconomic is generally accepted for rental projects as the return of total cost is 4.5% higher than the 10-year U.S. Treasury bill rate. I've got an example of how to calculate that right there. And for sale projects is the developer's fee to fall below 50% of the total development costs. That's usually what the HAC looks at to see if it's uneconomic. So they will open up the books, see what the applicant actually has the burden of proof to show this to the HAC, so they can look at the books and see if they actually would, the conditions would render this uneconomic. And that looks like it's a repeat. So local preference is another thing, and I don't know if the planning board wants to go over this in detail. It's basically giving local preference for the affordable units to people who live, work, and go to school within the town. There's a certain process that has to be followed to do this. It's after the permit has been issued. It's after the actual building has been constructed as well. And there's a lottery process that can go along with it too. The applicant, developer, administers the lottery, and it's usually done by certain HUD restrictions. So these are some of the definitions, and this is more for reference. I believe there's some printouts. I believe this will be available publicly, this presentation. So it's just for your reference. It's got the citations behind it, so you can check out the regulations online to see where they are, and just so you can use that moving forward. And again, this is the timeline. I've put in these fake dates, just to give you an idea of where you would be in this certain process. Helps you visualize a little bit more, I think. But other than that, that's my presentation. I kind of glossed over some things. I wanted to make it quick, so we didn't go into too much detail. But if there's other details or questions that anyone has, I'd be happy to go into more detail about that.
Thank you very much. I think if we're going to want to be able to refer back to those, and
Sure.
Gino, we'll get these posted.
Yes, we can get them online.
All
Yeah,
right,
should be able to post it online.
good.
Slides in there. Yeah, go ahead.
You want to?
You can put it in his computer.
Can I put the slides
Sure,
on your
sure,
computer?
sure.
Just because I know trying to switch out, sometimes the projectors don't always communicate well.
sit here too?
Okay.
Yeah, please, yeah. Let's move over here. No,
It's kind of awkward, but, we only have 4 short slides, but just to give people a visual of where we're at. See if I can find. Oh, I'm so used to a Mac, so, sorry. Forgot it. It took me forever to get used to give up the, yeah, it's only the only file on there, that's it. So, Neil, you want to join me, I guess? I guess we'll sit. We kind of weren't sure how this evening was going to run. Our hope is that we are putting this out there, and then we will be looking to John and Jerry to fill in maybe the technical details that we maybe don't have. But as far as the planning board, we're looking at, okay, where are we in Sherborne? And right now we have the potential initiatives to achieve affordable housing for the goal, the state mandated goal of 10% of the housing stock. Big question is, what is Sherborne doing towards this goal? And the one thing has been that the Board of Selectmen have revived the Housing Partnership Committee. We had a Housing Partnership Committee, but it kind of fizzled over the years. So it's been revived with our primary focus is going to be writing a housing production plan to promote affordable housing.
Addie, before you go ahead, I think
Yeah.
I should remind myself, normally the planning board has name tags up here, so we've been a little slack. Addie Mae Weiss and Neil Kessler are here doing the presentation, and Mary Neuter and Chris Owens, and myself, John Higley, are the planning board. Also, we're really looking forward to your thoughts and input, so we'll try to follow the rules I think everyone knows about. Stand up and identify yourself, and one person at a time. So now that I've properly introduced Addie, go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to let Neil kind of address this slide.
Hi. So basically, yeah, we're the Beals and Thomas went through the general idea of the kinds of things that influence 40B permitting, what the town is facing. We're at, I think it was 2.3%. And we have currently in the pipeline, and that doesn't mean that applications have been submitted, but there are a couple of projects that have already been permitted, partially built. So we have 34 units right now that count as affordable housing against our SHI. And then there are enough projects that are sort of, at least we're aware of, that would actually exceed the 10%. So, one of the things that we were talking about in planning board was just this idea of that we wanted to solicit people's opinion about how they would like to proceed as a town. This sort of the notions of safe harbor are mostly related to the idea that you would try to slow down the influx of affordable housing production, or slow down affordable housing production because for whatever reason you think going slower is better. But that's not necessarily the only way you can go. Given the amount of pressure or the number of developers looking at the town and seeing there being an opportunity for 40B development, if you take all those projects and you were to put them into the pipeline around the same time, you would be more than 10% all at once. And it doesn't mean that they would be built all at once, but it certainly does mean that they would be permitted in close proximity to one another time-wise. And that might be something that townsfolk might be comfortable with. Swallow the pill, get to yourself to 10%, worry about it in 2020 when the census is redone, and then you have to look at your percentages again. So, thanks. And then the other possibility is what the two gentlemen were talking about earlier, which is this idea of going more slowly. And large projects is one sort of safe harbor, and they talked about it a little bit. But more specifically here, I think that this sort of notion of safe harbor being 2%, which is this idea of recent progress. So for Sherburne, that's 30 units. And currently, there, if you were to take the fields at Sherburne, which has been permitted back in May, that's 8 units. And then, so you'd have another 22 that you would have to approve in the next calendar, or up until next May, or permit up until next May, that would allow you to sort of deny any other projects. And then, as the consultants were talking about, and we were talking about as well, if you were to get to having a housing production plan put in place and certified, which is something that the Housing Partnership Committee is working on at the moment, then you can kind of pull the throttle back even further and look at 0.5%, which would be 7 units a year for 12 months, and or 1%, which is 14 units. So, as you can see, there's quite a difference in terms of how fast you would grow your affordable housing, and it's really something for the town to think about. Now, one other thing I just wanted to say is that this would be wonderful if the town could just say, yeah, let's do this 2% route. But that's not necessarily the reality associated with 40B. As the gentlemen were saying, if you have not reached a safe harbor and an application for a project that is larger than 2%, that's 5%, something like that comes in, you can't say, no, I want one that's smaller so I can get to my 2%. It's a matter of the town either negotiating with developers or just sort of trying to manage it as best they can, given how much or how little control they have. So those are all factors that go into decisions that the town's making.
Right, so up on the board, we have the map of our town with the projects that are either in the pipeline or even, and then there's a couple that are not, they're not formally filed projects, but they've come before the town and presented an idea. So they are not yet filed with Mass Housing. They potentially are not even technically 40B because they're not filed, but they are projects that we have heard of. And so I guess in that note, the project presented earlier in the evening could be, the Sewell Brook project would be on here as well. But just to kind of give you a visual of how many units that, these are the units that we were using to get to, well, if you did it all, you get to 11.3%. But as a lot of us are aware, Whitney Farms is stalled right now. So, of course, all of this math is, to some degree, fuzzy math, but it's the best we have to work. But this is why we're looking for your input to kind of say, well, what are you thinking? There is a level of, we're going to have to do something. We can't do nothing. So we will need to figure out how we are, as a town, are going to get to our 10% affordable housing. This is, again, the projects in a snapshot. Whitney Farms is at the top, and it shows at the acres, how many units. All of the projects listed on here were proposed to the town as ownership. The Villages was the only rental project. Again, as discussed earlier, there's a benefit of rental projects in that if you have 20 to 25%, depending on what level median income you set those rentals for, the entire project counts towards our 10% of the towards the SHI units. They're all units are counted as SHI units, even though they're not all technically SHI units. So really, that was it. As far as what we have, we're mostly just kind of putting it out there, and we're hoping to get your feedback.
Yes, Alan?
Do you want to, John, do you want to come back this way? And
So Neil, when you said that the plan for 2.5%, we have that in place, then we could say no to certain projects. So just, hypothetical situation, if we publish that tomorrow, which of these projects would we be able to say no to?
So, sorry, you're asking about the 2%? So the 2% is actually, thank you, is that better? I don't know. The 2% that's the number that you can use if you do not have a housing production plan. So if a project were to be submitted to the town that met 2% and was permitted before any other projects were submitted, then that project would become that, it would meet that sort of safe harbor of recent progress, and the ZBA could deny any other projects that come in for a 12-month span.
Not so clear.
Neil, just to clarify what you just said, would the project that would fulfill our 2% requirement, would that have to be permitted before another project is presented to the town? What's the actual trigger there that would?
So in terms, if you wanted it to be, I think, legally in black and white, and maybe Gino can speak to this after I say that, but is that if it's submitted to the town and permitted before another project is submitted, then the ZBA can deny. If there's an overlap, it becomes fuzzy, right? If you wanted a small project to come first, you would at least try to submit it before a large project came down the pipe, but it becomes gray once you're sort of have not permitted before another project is submitted.
Could we hear from Matt?
So
Cousin?
once a project is permitted under the comprehensive permit process, before it's even built, it can get added to the SHI. So once it's permitted, it's basically affordable units, even if it's not built. There's a certain time limit that you can hold it for. I forget what it is. It might be a year and a half, that type of thing. So basically, what you were saying, if it's been permitted and then you meet the safe harbor, as long as another application hasn't been officially submitted, you can then, and I should clarify, you can deny the application without the worry of going before the HAC.
Even
You don't
if it
have to
has
deny the
been
application.
submitted? You can deny
If
an
it's been
application that has
submitted-
been submitted?
If the application has been submitted before you permitted the previous project that would have put you past the safe harbor, you would not be able to deny it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Lenny Rubin, 26 Elliott Street. I'm a little confused. Is the housing production plan housing that's originated by the planning board? Is it independent of the 40Bs? Or is that just adding up the 40Bs and putting them in line?
So
What is the housing production plan in contrast to 40Bs?
So a housing production plan is basically our roadmap for our town, and it will, in it, there's a section that talks about Sherborne, what it needs, what the type of housing that's here in existence, age of our population and trend, and in it, it shows how are we going to how does Sherborne want to try and get to 10%?
It's
Or
specific to affordable housing.
I mean, yeah, 10% of affordable housing, right. So in it, obviously, when you're talking about your plan, it require, when you have 40B projects, you include those as part of your discussion of these are currently happening. You include all the history. Basically, it's your history, and then it's your roadmap of what you'd like to do forward. So all the current 40B projects that are in the pipeline would be laid out and we'd be discussing, okay, these are one way that they're the reality. We can't maybe change all of that, but how are we also going to continue to add? So even if writing the housing production plan is not a futile effort, because even if we hit 10%, we still need a roadmap for how are we going to progressively keep adding, because it's a constantly shifting number as more market rate units are, as housing is built across the town, that number keeps shifting.
Does this include town-initiated developments?
Yeah, Lanny, your question's good, and it's really important to get this clarified, because an option to the town is to build 30 affordable units ourselves without a 40B, that counts in a housing production plan. Doesn't matter where the affordable housing comes from. It can come from any means. And some towns do have programs where they're building just affordable housing, not a mix, but just affordable housing. That can be part of the production plan.
Can somebody describe what a local initiative project is, how that process works?
Is that something you feel?
Yeah, I mean, not really, in this venue.
I can speak to that. a little bit.
Or
It's a housing that's a result of action taken by the town to make it happen. Like it could be a zoning change that requires affordable housing to be part of a project. It could be variances granted that make it happen. It could be a project like Leland Farms where the town initiated and developed the project itself. So, there's a number of ways you can accomplish a local initiative project. Another way is a private 40B that is endorsed by the Board of Selectmen. That's commonly referred to as a lit project, or a friendly 40B. That's also that's probably the most common version.
Chuck?
How long does it, this being a question for Beals and Thomas, how long does it take for a housing production plan to be certified? I'm sure it varies, but typically how long does that process take?
From soup to nuts,
Yep.
starting it up. I mean, it depends on how fast the town wants to go. I mean, you can do it within a year.
Once the plan is written, exactly what is the process of getting it certified, and how long does
I
that take?
believe it's just submission to DHCD, and then they review and certify. With the housing production plan, there's certain requirements laid out by the state that the plan has to address, and so as long as you meet those requirements, it's usually certified by DHCD after a review. They might come back with comments.
That's approved by DHCD. The certification comes when the housing gets built. So it varies. If say, the housing production plan says that we expect to get 7 units built as part of a 40B project, and then that 40B project goes forward and the 7 units are built or approved, it doesn't have to be built, then it gets certified.
So it's permitting. So essentially, if you permit those, then you can use that as a means of certification.
Correct.
And it can be incrementally certified as a project come in, correct?
Once it, yes,
Yeah,
it
right.
has to be.
Yes,
Once
right.
it's certified, it's
Exactly.
only good for 1 year.
Exactly, right.
Yes.
Frank S., South Main Street. So then if we had a large rental proposal, as we've seen one here, and there was agreement with the developer, you could actually stage that. You could look at the whole thing, but you could just approve 30 units. Okay, and that would give you 2 years, and you could approve the next 30 units, and that would give us 4 years to look at other projects that we could look at carefully to develop. So if you could work with someone like that, you could stage it.
It's an option. That's right.
I think that's what Gino's referring to as, it's typically called the friendly 40B. There are options when developers come to town that they will actually informally approach the town to try and get a sense of what would be the will of the board to make the process go smoothly, quite frankly. And that there's a general sense that the board will approve it as long as everything meets their satisfaction during the review process.
Yeah.
Shannon over at Sewellbrook, you had said that once it's submitted to the HAC, it doesn't really matter what the quota is, because they're going to review it regardless. Is that correct or incorrect?
I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question.
You said that when the project was submitted to the HAC, if it had already been submitted to the HAC.
So has the project been denied, approved with conditions?
That's what I'm wondering. So
Okay.
is it just a submission that puts it into the pipeline and then it's going to be reviewed regardless of where your quotas are? Or
The HAC is an appeals body,
appeals body, okay.
so it's submitting to the town And then
okay.
if it
No,
gets
yeah,
appealed,
I get
that's
you. Okay, so it gets submitted to the town clerk, reviewed by the ZBA. If the ZBA, once the ZBA takes action on it,
Yeah.
if the applicant or developer wants to appeal, then they go to the HAC. The HAC doesn't review the permit application until an action has been taken by the ZBA.
So of the 40B projects in the pipeline, do we know which ones have gone before the ZBA and are in the HAC yet, or?
No, well, there's Whitney Farm has been permitted a long time ago, but the field at Sherburne is currently in appeals with the HAC because there were conditions in the permit granted to them by the ZBA that the applicant appealed. All of the other projects, Green Lane, any of the Coolidge Street projects, none of them have been submitted to the town formally.
Yeah, okay.
I think maybe he's asking about a different step, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm sorry. The first step is for the developer to submit an application to the state for a letter of eligibility. But that doesn't put it into the pipeline, correct?
No, so the applicant can submit a project to any of the 4 subsidizing agencies for a project eligibility letter. That kind of doesn't, it gives the town warning, but it doesn't start the process. They can get a project eligibility letter and then wait for 2 years before they submit it to the ZBA, and it doesn't change the timeline. The good thing for the town is, once it's submitted for a project eligibility letter, the subsidizing agency then sends it to the town for review for 30 days for comment. The town can provide comment, they can send it to all the different departments and boards for initial review. So they've got notice that this has now been filed with the subsidizing agency, and then they submit their comments back to that subsidizing agency, which then includes those comments in the project eligibility letter. It's an actual letter that gets issued to them, and then it also gets submitted as part of the application for the 40B to the ZBA. So there is a step beforehand, but it does not start the process.
And actually, that's an interesting point, John, because what you say about the early warning, many towns will provide comments that, as John has mentioned, is in then the project eligibility letter. And typically those comments, the conditions of the eligibility letter will say, town has expressed a concern over groundwater quality impacts to drinking water. During the course of the comprehensive permit application, we expect that these comments would be thoroughly vetted and discussed. So it's a warning as well to the applicant that this is what the town has initially expressed some concerns over, whether it's traffic, septic, groundwater, any valid reason, that the board will then take those, if they agree with them, and put it in there and ask the applicant to address those in a thorough manner.
Yes.
Is there any addition to
Can you identify yourselves?
Sorry, Artist Lavelle, 32 Maple Street. Is there any addition to that, or is that 30 days a hard and fast cutoff, and then after that, no more?
It's a pretty hard and fast cutoff because it's not, it's an approval for eligibility, but it's not a granting of any permit. So they, I would assume, think that most of the issues are going to be ironed out in the 180 days of the hearings. All they're really looking at is the funding and site eligibility aspects of it, not of any local issues. They put that burden on the town.
Chuck?
Of the CBA decisions that have been appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee, what percentage, I've heard different percentages, want to see what your sense is of what percentage of those rulings are in favor of the town and what percentage are in favor of the developers?
It's very high in favor of the developer. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say it's in the 90s.
I've heard 90 and I've heard 95.
Yeah.
Are the two figures that I've heard.
I don't know the exact number, but it's very high.
It's actually on the website.
Given the nature of the 40B process and concept, it would appear that in any housing production plan, the central focus is the pace in which the town wants to go forward. Because as I think about 40B and the horse is out of the barn, in Sherman's case, we're playing catch-up ball. So it's really, would you agree that it's really mostly a numbers game, a question of pace, nothing to do with the location of 40B projects in different parts of town? closer to the center of town, for instance. So
Um,
it's none of that soft kind of thinking, aesthetics, location.
It can be included in the housing production plan. It's all depending on what the town is focused on. If the town knows they want, if they know they want to build a certain amount of units, and they've maybe got applications to meet those kind of units, that number of units, they might focus a little bit more on the aesthetics of the location in the housing production plan and say these are the certain things, but
Does that make any difference in the end?
it depends. It's the worst answer to give.
Given the
but it's
90% figure I'm hearing,
Well, the housing production plan is different than the comprehensive permit process. So in terms of the comprehensive permit process, the ZBA can request, put conditions on for aesthetics. Location, I mean, once they've applied to the ZBA, they've already gotten their site eligibility, so they're not going to change the location of the project. But the ZBA can do different things with conditions for facades, that type of thing, landscaping. And then depending on how it's worded and how litigious the developer is, they could get upheld, they could just not care, the developer could just not care about those conditions and let them go. It really depends on the situation.
one other question. One of your slides referred to the minimum profit margin of 15% of the developer's costs. Over the years, there have been rumors about developers inflating those costs. So who looks at those costs, and what has been the recent experience in the state regarding that calculation?
So the HAC reviews those costs. Once the decision has been made and the applicant decides to appeal to the HAC, they need to prove, if they're saying this is making it uneconomic, they need to prove that it is. So they need to open up their books and the HAC takes a look at that. In terms of recent history, I don't know of any specific examples right now. Usually it's for other types of things. Uneconomic, like that one condition with landscaping, there's small things that are not, the developer could not prove that those are making uneconomic. In terms of a return on cost, a return on developer's fees, it's not a common thing in front of the HAC.
I've got a question for you. Let's say you've got two large projects that come from two different 40B developers into the town around the same time. Obviously, one of them is not going to be permitted before the other's submitted. How does the ZBA, let's say they find one project more palatable than the other. I don't know much about what was presented earlier tonight, but that's an 82-unit project. There's talk of projects up on Coolidge Street that are about the same size for us. How does the ZBA handle that, and do they have any sort of latitude in terms of which projects they sort of approve or permit? And then I guess the same question as it relates to, let's say one developer doesn't get their permit first, and then they appeal to the HAC. Like, how does the HAC view that sort of stacking, that kind of overlap?
So that's a tough situation because they really do look at when the permit was granted, and if something has been submitted, you don't get under that wire. I don't know of many of these projects. I mean, Sherborne's a unique situation where it's a small town, so these large but not huge. I mean, they're not 300-unit projects like you can see in other places. They're not massive. To see two of them come in at one time in the same 180-day period is not very common. So I don't even know if there's an example to say this has gone before the HAC.
I do know of one.
You do know of
Yeah,
one?
but I don't want to, but I will say that the way it was staged is there was a project that, a very large project came into a town actually, and the board actually rejected the application as incomplete, and it was incomplete. And by that was there's a minimum criteria that needs to be submitted. And our firm had reviewed it, and it's one of the few letters I've written to say, and I specifically wrote it in there saying, we actually can't review this right now. There's not enough information for us to review that. Another development came in to the town as well, maybe about a month later, actually. It was very well packaged. It was someone that the town was familiar with. The ZBA in that particular town told the prior applicant, use this as an example, watch what they're coming in to do, because they actually wanted the first project, but they needed a credible project to come in. It was intended to be a friendly 40B. The second one was approved very quickly, only because they did a very nice job presenting the project, defending the project, explaining the project. The town was comfortable with it. The town was actually not comfortable with the first project, even though they wanted it, because they didn't have enough information to make an educated decision. So actually, that second one, actually, they ended up approving it with conditions, but the conditions were quite significant on that. I haven't heard whether they appealed them or not, but there was because it was a friendly 40B, they had said, put the conditions on there, because we want the approval right now for financing, actually. But some of the conditions were that they come back with plans that are able to be approved. It was significant conditions, and there was we worked with a 40B consultant as well, and that we were reviewing for the town. And I think everyone agreed that the conditions were pretty substantial for a 40B that was a friendly 40B. So it is unusual. It just coincidentally that happened this year in a project. So I don't know if that gives some perspective, but
It's a tough situation, because Sherborne is in the position where if you get enough units, you'll meet your 10% and then you can deny. A lot of towns don't get two applications where granting one of them would then put them in a position to deny the next one. So it's a tough situation to be in, and I don't know if I have an answer about what the town can do to accept one and deny another if they're that close and if they're both that far.
But, why don't we just call up and get back to them on that, because...
Yeah, we can definitely look into
call
that,
up.
see if there's been other examples of small towns looking in.
Seeing as we're a small town, it doesn't take huge projects to make it a large
Right.
project, and over the percentage that's allowed in a small town. Do you know of any situation in which the same developer bought two contiguous properties and proposed first one development on one and then another development on the neighboring property in order to make them two separate projects, neither of which alone would be a large project that could be denied on that basis, but together they would? How would Mass Housing look at such a situation?
That's something that Mass Housing would have to make the decision on, of whether it's one project. I mean, it's...
Is there any history on that, any case history?
I actually don't know of one offhand, quite frankly.
It's a very unique situation.
Yeah, but I mean, actually, again, we can call and ask them, because the reality of it is they have a caseload history that you can actually search and ask people, and quite a number of the people at Mass Housing are extremely well informed of even the nuances of how things came to be, quite frankly, because typically, unfortunately, most 40B projects are not readily accepted. I mean, there's a controversy. Some of them are more controversial than others, so they do have a good history, but we can certainly find out, because I know what you're referring to, actually, but I don't know how they would look at that.
That's kind of an institutional knowledge type thing. There's no database
Who
where
makes
you
the
can search.
determination, though? Because let's say both projects come
Right.
before, is it the ZBA that says, no, these should be considered one? Or is it something that happens during the site approval process? When does that determination
I
get
mean, I
made?
guess if they're submitting the two projects separately, it can't happen during the site approval process, because they don't have the context to say, oh, well, these two projects are next to each other. So it's likely before the ZBA saying, no, this is one large, we're asserting that this is a large project.
Right.
And then if the developer wants to appeal it, they appeal it to the HAC, and then the HAC is going to be the final determinator of whether this constitutes a large project or not.
Well, sorry, perhaps, and I don't know where they are on the stage, if the project eligibility letter hasn't been issued yet, and you're aware of, and you have the opportunity to provide comments on it, to provide conditions, as I mentioned before, you may tip them off so that when their project eligibility letters come in, that it's acknowledged that both of these are proximate to one another, that it may be in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the town that they be combined. It could be due to emergency access, open space issues, and so on and so forth. But let's find out, actually. It's sort of an interesting question.
Yeah, Sherborne's in a very unique situation with these projects. And it's a tough question to answer when you haven't seen things like this come up in a small town meeting these certain criteria.
Laney?
Yeah, just curious, how do you monitor the income, or who monitors the income to make sure that people are in the affordable range? And how often are those incomes monitored? It sounds like a big bureaucratic job to just take care of that.
So the units are deed restricted. So it would be the town and DHCD or whoever monitors the affordable housing. They need to be certified as affordable.
Do you mean how to demonstrate that the person's
Somebody's
income?
goes up,
Oh, I'm sorry, the person's income is...
income.
Oh, that's done by, I believe it's DHCD that does that. DHCD, Department of Housing. There's a process to be eligible for affordable housing, and there's certain things that need to be proven in order for them to be eligible.
But it's only done, excuse me, Frank, it's only done at the time of purchase, for purchase
Correct.
units. You could win the lottery the
Correct.
next day, and it doesn't matter. Once you're in, you're in.
However, with the homeownership units, there's a certain limit that they can sell their house for. They can't buy it affordable and then sell it for $1 million 2 years later. There's a certain, in the deed, there's a certain restriction that says they can't sell it for a certain percentage more than they bought it for, or a certain percentage more than the market affordable rate is at that point in time. However, with the rental units, they could rent a unit, win the lottery, and stay in that affordable rental unit at that same price.
Frank, you were next.
That was the same question. On the rental, you have to be recertified every year. So.
Oh, to be eligible?
Recertification of
Okay.
all the affordable units every year. So if somebody incomes out, they get married, or they get a good job, they can't have the affordable unit anymore, which is generally why in the rentals, there's no distinction between the market units and the affordable units, because you never know what unit might be the next affordable unit, because it can be, an affordable person could become a market person the next year, because they got a better job or they got married.
But there is a requirement that the same percentage of affordable units are available.
Correct, so the developer has to take the next vacant unit and make it an affordable unit, no matter what it was. And then it has to go through the certification process and be lotteried out. And that person has to be approved by DHCD to be rented.
Right, so that's, I guess, that just kind of one more thought when you're thinking about rental versus homeownership units. As 40B homeownership units are built, the 25% that are set aside for to be SHI units, on the outside they all look the same. On the inside, those units are going to be different finishes, different, carpet, not hardwood, and so on. Rental units, because that changes, all rental units are built to the same standards.
Yeah.
Isn't there some sort of time limit, if you own one of these units and you go to sell it, you were saying that it can only be a certain percentage above what you bought it for, but doesn't that time out at some point, like if you have it on the market, you can't sell it, isn't there something?
You mean if you have it on the market for like a
If
year
you're trying
and
to
you
sell
can't
your
sell
unit,
it?
yeah.
I can look into that. I don't know if there's a time limit. I know that there's a time limit for the affordability on the deed. If you've owned it for maybe more than 30 years and the affordability rider has run out. In terms of on the market for a certain amount of time, I don't know if that's actually a thing. I can look into that.
Thank you.
Rick Novak, I think I can answer that. The prices are such a discount to market, they don't linger.
I'm sorry, say it again?
The prices are such a discount to the regular market, they don't linger.
Does the purchaser have to meet the same income eligibility?
Yeah.
If it's, yes, it's an affordable unit, yes.
The second buyer is.
Carol?
I'm curious if the situation that we have, like with the Whitney Farm development, where the units are not selling, and evidently they maybe are priced incorrectly for a market. Does that have any impact on how the housing authority use other submissions? In other words, I guess I'm just wondering are the 40B developers expected to have some reasonable, rate at which they develop and sell these units once they've gotten approved? And then if subsequent 40B developers, propose something in the same price range, for instance, would that be taken into consideration?
So not being familiar with the development that you're talking about, I'll try and talk generally on that. It can be considered, but it would not be a very strong condition. The HAC would not, I guess you could condition the approval that is for a certain different market rate or however else you want to describe it, but it wouldn't likely be upheld due to, it's very hard to defend that as helping affordable housing, if that makes sense. It's kind of a difficult question to answer.
See, it's just been confusing for a lot of people in town that there's a 40B development in town where the non-affordable units seem to be priced very high and they're not selling.
So it's kind of out of the purview of the affordability part of it, because those are the market rate units.
Yeah.
So there's really no authority controlling those units,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's really up to the developer. I mean, so if it were the affordable units that we're having a hard time selling, I think there would be an issue that might be more important. But the market rate units is kind of up to the developer to price, and if they don't sell, we're kind of losing money just having them not sell. I mean, it's up to them. That's kind of the attitude, I would think. But in terms of future projects, that would even be less of something that would matter to the HAC.
Frank, did you have a question?
It was answered, thank you.
Okay.
Am I calling on people?
Is there another question? Yeah.
Yes, Brad Van Brunt. So theoretically, if you had a development that was 20% low-income housing.
So it would be for AMI of 50% or less.
Okay. The developer can make the choice as to which units to build first. The expensive or the low income? Yes?
No, it's be proportional.
Yeah, it's got.
It has to be proportional?
And it's got to. I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a home ownership, that would be an issue. But if it's a rental, that would
So
be-
Whitney Farm, for instance, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Whitney Farm is proportional?
And actually, that comes up during the public hearings numerous times, because people have a fear, obviously, that
Yeah.
the affordable houses are built last, they're not built the same, and as actually was mentioned, they're supposed to be indistinguishable, quite frankly, and people usually ask, frankly, I don't know, other than being proportional, because I know, actually, in different ones I've been involved with, there's sort of a commitment on behalf of, because it's supposed to be in affordable housing, that developers have been pushed, I don't want to say to front-load it, but to make sure that they're front-loaded, I mean, quite frankly. And so there's some production schedule, like, included in from time to time, yeah.
One other question. And I guess this goes back to your number, the 11.3%. How many additional housing units would Sherburne have to have in order to achieve that 11.3?
I think the 11.3 comes from 167 units. So according to the 2010 census, 10% is 148 units. We have 34 right now. 8 have been permitted at the fields, and so whatever the difference is. So I think 167 is what ends up being the 11.3%. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, but my question is,
Yes,
how
Brad.
many total?
If I understand your question, how many more would we need once the 2020 census? Well, I don't know, I don't have that exact number, but just in context, if no other housing was built other than those 40Bs, and then the 2020 census came out, we would drop to 9.5. We would be under, so.
But don't we have, doesn't the 11.3 mean there has to be an additional? The developer has to build 3 times that many, 4 times that many houses.
That chart showed, I think, 280 units
280,
total, of
okay.
which 167 would be counted as in the SHI.
And to some degree, it matters on whether it's rental units or not, because if you're at 2575, the 75 are market rate, they count toward the extra, so it compounds itself.
Yes.
Hi, Cindy Ostrowski. Sorry, Cindy Ostrowski, Dexter Drive. I'm just looking for clarification on Brad's question about Whitney Farms. So, did somebody say that they are building proportionally or not? I didn't hear the answer to that.
Rick Nowak, I'll try to answer all of them. I think Whitney Farms is building proportionally. One of the reasons why we're so sensitive to Whitney Farms is it's a project where, for one reason or another, they horrifically miscalculated the market appetite for their units. And they're coming back to the town saying, well, gosh, we don't really put in that water system, and gee, we don't put in that septic system. Give us a break here, give us a break there. And that's why everybody in there was so sensitive, is because that developer clearly did a terrible job of forecasting. And I think you would tell us that if we went to Hack on another project and said, well, we didn't like their numbers, we think we can run their numbers better, Hack would give us the back of the hand pretty quickly, would they not? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, you're involved in the process, so if you have data that helps them, look at it, but the reality is,
Right, but bad development deals, good development deals,
Exactly,
all and so do bad ones. Brad's question is a really simple one with a really simple answer, which is, it doesn't depend a little bit on rental. It depends almost entirely on rental. Because if they're all 25%, we need 776 new units of production to get there because of the tail chasing problem. So that's why rental is so important, is because it's the only thing that counts 1 to 1. And 776 is half again what we have today.
Adam.
Just to clarify that, because I thought I heard Gino say we would be at 9.5% in 2020, but then I just thought I heard that in 2020 we need 700 more units because of the additional it's in some of
The question is how many rental units count. Rental units count 4 times as much as, and the least comfortable number is that we need 776 today. So we have to hit 10% tomorrow morning. How many units do we need to build tonight? And none of them are rental. They only have the 25%. That answer, from a math standpoint, is 776.
There's no rental developments on that.
Yeah, one of them is 88 units, which is a big number.
Oh, and you gotta go through that math again. How do you get 776 for 10% of 14?
Because every time you add 88 units and 22 of them
No,
are...
I only had every 10 units. It's 114 units we need right now for what's not committed.
Yeah, we have, I'm going to recognize the next hand that's up, but we have two things to talk about. One is today, and the other is long-term. We have a housing partnership that's formed and working at this, and starting the process of a housing production plan. That's a long-term thing. And so we have, how do we respond to this stuff right today? That's a big question. And then the longer-term question, which is what happens with, is this going to be 11%, or what happens with the next census in 2020? That's a long-term thing. And Ben, you raised your hand.
I was just saying that the short end, I think he was trying to explain that it's hard because if it's a rental, you got a 110 unit rental, that would take care of all your requirements plus the new requirements from that 110 unit rental. But if you have an 88 unit for sale, you need 9 more units. You created 22 against your deficit, but you added a requirement of 9. So that's why rentals are so popular.
And one other thing is that the 776 is the worst-case scenario, but it's the idea that even if today you were to try to meet this 10% that we have under the 2010 census, right now, if you were to do it all at this 25-75 ownership, that means you have to add hundreds more units today, and then forgetting about the 2020 census and how many more units after that fact, but just you're adding that many units right now to meet that 10% now.
Tom?
In Sherburne's case, I think our own experience with 40B is Woodhaven. But if all these projects go through, then in a very short period of time, we'll be at the 10%, maybe above it. So my question is, maybe a little academic, but what can you tell us about the experience of, let's say, medium or smaller towns in operating 40B projects, affordable units versus the market rate units? You know, sort of a sociological question, if you will. Do they mostly work, or have there been difficulties?
I'm not familiar with the difficulty much that's mentioned where the market rate houses on selling it. I'm not familiar with the process, but typically, quite frankly, the ones that have been developed in the towns we're involved with, they're priced appropriately, and the affordable housing gets quickly habited, and the people that have done them have done a reasonable job at selling the market rate homes, actually, quite frankly. It may be in the case with asset, the cost of the development, I have no idea, I'm not familiar with it, is that the subsidy for the affordables is driving the price of the market rate ones much higher than they had anticipated, quite frankly, but I'm not certain. The other thing, too, is to mention is typically, even though this is a confined timeline, rarely in my experience does there not continuances and extensions given by the developer, because even in a controversial project, there's an advance of we're making progress because everyone knows that, you know, it could be before, you know, the HAC and so on and so forth. People are trying to make a good faith effort to get it moving on, so it typically extends beyond, the intent was to have an accelerated process. I don't know what the town's prior experience was with before, but in my experience, it typically gets extended, but with the cooperation of the applicant, obviously, to do that if they think they're making progress toward their goal. And there's often talks of reducing projects in scale. There's the back and forth about the affordability of that and so on and so forth, but they're peer reviewed for engineering and landscaping and vegetative buffers and so on and so forth. So it ends up, I don't want to give the impression it's a very quick process and there's not oversight throughout it. They're typically, the engineers for the applicant are presenting why they think it's in the town hires, which the applicant is typically required to pay for, whether it's traffic, engineering, noise, geotechnical, water quality consultants if there's an issue with that regard. So it goes on, actually. I mean, it's not done as quickly, in my experience, as the graph suggests. You know, I think that's important for you to understand.
Can I ask another question? You had said earlier that Sherburne is unique in certain ways, and I think everybody here thinks that too, but maybe for other reasons. But we like our town. But you also showed a graphic showing that there were a lot of towns that had similar percentages, 2.3, 2.8, 2.6. Are towns, regardless of their size, but just in terms of that kind of percentage, how are they facing the same sorts of influx of 40B projects? And if so, you know, are there, in what ways are they, you know, able to or trying to steer the process as they get multiple projects coming in?
So there are a lot of towns getting projects, especially in the greater Boston area. Sherburne has, for the size of the town, a much more higher proportion of projects than I've seen in other towns. Newton gets a couple projects a year, but Newton is much bigger. You've seen Wellesley get a lot of projects in the past. I don't know if they get 3 or 4 a year, but they get probably 1 or 2 a year. And it's really just managing each project. It's trying to work with the developer to get the project as close to what you are able to digest as possible, and trying to incrementally work your way up to that 10% so that you can either deny or condition a project so that it's how you want it to be. a lot of it is just working with the developer, because I don't want to say they have a lot of power in the process, but the odds are in their favor just because of the need for affordable housing. A lot of developers, despite the view of a lot of the citizens, are trying to work with the town to get a good project, because they want the town, they want the town as a whole to accept their project so that it's more successful. So I think it helps to definitely go into the process looking at it like that, and trying to work with the developer as much as you can, and just trying to get a successful project through that process.
Yeah, it's a good point, too. I mean, there are developers out there that have a track record of success as well, and, you know, many of them will come into a town and demonstrate to different towns through either illustrations or, you know, having boards call boards they've dealt with, quite frankly, to see, you know, how cooperative they were and so on, to give a general sense. I know there's a project going on right now where it's a very high-level developer. They want a quality project. They have a reputation for providing good products. So there are out there. I think what happens is there are a number of outliers. So you do hear of projects that are highly contentious. They're highly emotional in terms of, and they're confrontational, actually. So those are the type of projects that actually really stick with people in terms of the acrimony that sometimes it leaves in a town.
Right, and from I guess the institutional question about looking at, we are a small town and we have comprised of volunteer boards, and most of our administrative staff are not full-time. Is there, you know, you mentioned Newton having several projects to review. Most 40B projects in most other towns are towns that have public water, so Board of Health would not be involved. Well, I guess if they have septic, they'd be involved, but
Right.
it'd be a much more limited process. Is there any guidance, given that a town facing multiple projects to review and only so many weeknights and only so many hours
Yeah,
to
actually,
review?
no, a good point. Actually, sorry, what we recommend, actually, and I think actually applicants appreciate it, quite frankly, is to set out a schedule what the hearings are. Do not try and evaluate the entire project meeting after meeting after meeting, but if there's a particular concern, whether it's traffic, water quality, water supply, wastewater, have a meeting devoted to those. So it's only on that topic, because the reality of it is, as you said, and I've mentioned this before, typically you have volunteer boards. There's a limited amount of time. There are sometimes productive offline meetings that are publicly noticed, but for instance, you may have consultants for the applicant meet with consultants for the town, quite frankly. Typically, the town can engage a 40B consultant just to advise on the process. Throughout, they sit through the meeting and advise on the process. The applicant usually has a 40B consultant as well. It's a small community of people. Most of those people know one another, quite frankly. But then also the board is allowed to engage civil engineering for drainage, environmental engineers for sewage disposal, water development. Interestingly enough, it is
Those would
unusual.
be separate of the staff.
I'm sorry?
Those would be
They're
separate
from the
engineers from the staff.
Separate, absolutely. And the other issue that you raise up is, you know, for instance, if Sherman just has septic systems and water supply, that actually is one of the longest public hearings I was involved with. It was a project in Carlisle, which is somewhat similar to this, actually, and it went on for quite a bit of time because it was an aggressive development. There were water wells proposed to service. There were a on-site treatment plant. And the reality of it is, for people that are informed about that, there are setbacks associated with those. There is separation. A water supply well has a protective radius. So the reality of it is, it becomes sort of a geometric exercise, quite frankly, which is not good for design, quite frankly. If you're prescribed where to put the well and where to put the septic, actually the best way to do it is to look at the topography and the landscape where it naturally fits, but that becomes an issue when you're trying to put on an on-site septic sewage disposal system as well as on-site wells. And sometimes it comes, the radiuses for wells can be, again, more of a geometric, there's more than one well, it's two wells. And you have to then put drainage basins, infiltration, and so on and so forth. So it becomes very complicated. So to come into a town with no water and it is a challenge, actually, for the people who are designing it as well, but also to review it. And I think that's where the conditions become more particular once it moves on, because what we also didn't mention is there's a lower bar for what comes into the town as well, for what's approved. It has to be reviewable, and we've reviewed them. We have actually prepared 40B projects, and we've reviewed them. And I have always said to applicants, because sometimes you'll get a one-sheet plan, it's one sheet, two sheets maybe, where typically, if that was to come into the regular process, it may be a 30-sheet plan. So I've said to people before, the town has hired us to review this. I can't give them a credible answer, because I don't have enough to review. There's a minimum amount that you need to review, and if you are going to go that way, the conditions are extraordinary in that. And sometimes they will be defensible because there's not that much information given.
Just to build off of that real quick, I think I talked about it probably very quickly, so maybe it wasn't captured. The board can request and vote, and actually it's not even a request, it's almost a requirement, of the developer to pay for review services. So if they provided a traffic plan or sewer plan or septic plan, that type of thing, the ZBA can vote for a reasonable amount of money to be paid for by the developer for the town's consultant to review these projects. There's a certain limit as to how much the town can require that kind of review. They can't just make things up to then to slow down the process or anything like that. They can't really require studies that might not really pertain to the project. But if they're saying there's a 100-unit subdivision and there's going to be a certain amount of traffic generated by that, prepare a traffic plan and then give us the money to hire a traffic consultant to review that plan on our behalf. That kind of takes the burden away from the volunteer boards. They can provide a review letter summarizing everything, and then hopefully the boards can use that to make the decision rather than study the whole plan themselves.
And just another comment, I'm sorry. What happens during the process, quite frankly, is it's quickly apparent whether it is sort of contentious. You're going to argue over minutiae of drainage calculations. That's a waste of everyone's time, and particularly the board if it's volunteers, particularly the people who are coming to the meeting, who are coming after work, and so on and so forth. So it quickly becomes apparent if there's a cooperation between the applicant wanting to make the project suitable for the board to accept the project or not. Sometimes it doesn't get to that point. I think that's when it becomes much more difficult, when at the end of the process the board doesn't want the project. So you have to craft conditions that are defensible. That's much more difficult and tricky. And quite frankly, as John said, then the odds are stacked, because essentially it's a very difficult thing to do.
Marion, you have a question, then Robert.
Right. A quick follow-up question. I'd like to come back to the issue of the burden on the town in reviewing these things. Seeing as we have only groundwater wells and individual septic systems, the burden on our boards is particularly heavy, as you said. But I wonder if at the state or the mass housing level, there is any intent to design some mitigation for towns like ours? Because in our case, citizens have pooled their money to get a lawyer. The town has dipped into its coffers to pay for extra consultants that we needed. And it seems that you're not going to be able to answer this now, but I'm wondering if there's any discussion on mitigating support for towns like ours where the burden is particularly heavy.
And I think that's where that hiring a consultant part comes in, and I apologize if this is repetitive.
Through the applicant.
Through the applicant, right, during the process. MHP, Mass Housing, all four subsidizing agencies provide technical assistant grants as well to help the 40B process, help alleviate some of the costs for the 40B process. That's how we're here. MHP is paying for us to give this talk. The town is not paying for us, though we are working on behalf of the town. So in terms of trying to alleviate some of the cost on the town, there are ways through the developer to get some of those services paid for. I don't know if that answers the question.
And I think I'd add to that, too, is frankly, the more sophisticated developers realize the value of paying for the review consultant. To a certain point, it actually gets expensive. They don't want to do it anymore. But the reality of it is, rather you're having someone review it, a professional review it, they actually may say it's acceptable. And so the reality of it is, depending on the consultants that you get, it is a peer review. It isn't a mercenary review. It isn't. It is intended to be, I'll tell you what's wrong with the project, but if it's a good project, I also will tell you it's a good project.
Yeah, we've experienced
Yeah,
that.
right. So that's the intent, and I always say to the developer, you're better off having a qualified consultant review it, because unless they're going to deviate from what standard practice is, if the stormwater is designed correctly, they typically say the stormwater is designed correctly. If the traffic is what it is, you have that review, and so it becomes, it's sometimes in the applicant's world. For example, a project we reviewed, there was a traffic engineer, we don't review traffic. The traffic engineer requested sidewalk extension to accommodate school children, a bus stop, a play area, crosswalks, and there was great resistance from the applicant to provide that. In the end, they provided it, because it actually made sense, actually, that it be done. It actually made for a better design. The board was satisfied with the project with certain components included.
Robert, and then Rick.
Robert Johnson, Western Avenue. You've got 180 days there. Now, sometimes, a lot of the time, information is lacking, technical information, and the applicant promises it by a certain date and doesn't produce it, or produces only half of it, and then they'll come in on the final day and deliver the information that you need to a board that has never seen it before, and now suddenly this board has a deadline which it needs to meet, and it's getting this information on its desk the day of the meeting. How do we prevent that sort of thing from occurring so that the boards, all the boards involved who need to advise the zoning board of appeals, that they don't get into this jam, or that if the jam is created by the applicant, that the 180 days gets extended so that there is adequate time for review, so that the board doesn't have something landed on their desk and immediately have to react to it.
Right.
What
So
can
the first,
be done in that
the
sort of
first thing
case?
I would say is to work with the developer. Hopefully they're reasonable people. If that doesn't happen, there are steps that you can take in the process to prove that they are non-cooperative. And if they're non-cooperative, the town has some powers to either deny or work with the subsidizing agency to extend the time period. So if there's proof, like what you're saying, if that happens, multiple times, if they're not giving you plans, and it's got to be a significant thing. It can't just happen one time. It's kind of like, and it's if they take up a lot long time. They don't give you the things on time routinely. There's no time to review, that type of thing, and it's getting close to it. And they're not willing to give you an extension. There are steps that the town can take to extend that period or to deny.
What sort of steps, and are
It's
those
through
steps through the housing?
It's through the
appeals committee,
subsidizing
or-
agency. So it's through the subsidizing agency, so it would either be Mass Housing, Mass Development, MHP, or DHCD. They provide the funding for these projects, the subsidy, so that these projects can get accomplished. So they would withhold certain things to allow the project to not move forward. or they can take, it would be on their behalf that they can take action to make the project not move forward, since they have a little bit more power than the town in that sense. It's kind of a last resort, and I have not seen it happen recently, but I know I've talked to MHP, and they say there are steps that you can take through them. But it's usually trying to work it out with the developer beforehand, and there's some steps beforehand that I would recommend before taking the action of going to the subsidizing agency to try and extend it. A lot of developers are very reasonable and realize that there's certain things that they need to do and need to provide to get this thing done. So I really haven't heard of a lot of projects where developers are just trying to plow through the 180 days, not give any information, and just say, you know what, time has run out, now approve it. I've never really heard that.
I can comment, it's similar to what I was referring to before, where there's frequently requests for extension of time. The town will ask the applicant to sign an extension of time to advancing, because actually the phenomenon you're talking happens quite frequently. Actually, in terms of a reviewer, traffic engineer, civil engineer will provide comments. There's a delay in getting it back, a significant delay actually. You know, the next hearing is, in a 40B, these hearings are scheduled to accommodate this particular timeline. And what happens, quite frankly, is information will come in late. So it's the job of the consultant for the town, whether it's a traffic engineer, to say, I need 2 weeks to review this. There's a professional world out there as well that it's happened to me numerous times. I'll actually get something handed to me at the meeting, itself, and the applicant will say, we provided Beals and Thomas with our responses, as if the provision of the responses is addressing the responses. And then we would say, we just received them right now, we haven't had an opportunity to look at them, we'll get back. And it takes on a life of its own, but that's why I said it. Typically, if the applicant thinks they're making progress, they'll give the extension of time, actually, if they see it's a fair process. And
just to clarify, what Jerry's saying is the delays happen frequently. People do not turn things in on time. The plowing through the 180 days does not happen frequently, where they're not responsive, they're not cooperative. That is not a frequent thing. But just like any other development, they have certain timelines that they're trying to meet. Sometimes they go past those deadlines, and so they're not able to give you anything. But generally, they're willing to work with you to extend that 180 days if that becomes a common occurrence.
This conversation began with, or is focused on the burden, and I'm cognizant of the burden on the boards and also the public here. So we've been going for, we're almost approaching 2 hours. It's really good discussion. This is a lot of information to digest and understand, but I also don't want to make too much more of a burden on everybody. But I also, I'll say it again, I'm really grateful to the selectmen, to the zoning board, and to my fellow board members for this grant and for the consultants. Let's exploit them as much as we can. Rick, you got a question?
I was going to try to answer Mary Ann's question, but I'll yield the time to someone who can get more out of Beals and Thomas.
Yeah, there we go. So, Carol, you'll be next. So, I also want to make sure that the planning board gets the. We want to hear from people here as well on everything that we talked about. So, I want to remind you that we've got some input we'd like to get. Carol.
Well, Addie Mae and Neil talked a little bit about the housing production plan, and now that you know a little bit more about the town, I'm just wondering, in the situation that we're in now, what would be the primary benefits for us to kind of move ahead quickly with that? Because it seems like we do have an opportunity potentially for some friendly 40Bs. If we get our plan into place, how does that benefit or not benefit the town?
So I'm probably the wrong person to ask that, because I'm a planner, so I think plans are always great. They give a roadmap for what the town wants, like Addie Mae was saying, they give a roadmap for what the town wants to do in the future. And it is primarily focused on affordable housing, but it's not just affordable housing. So housing production plans are usually good to just kind of get everything out in the open, get the plan, get the town on one page on housing production. And then if, certain units were to fall off the SHI and you find yourself below 10% again, it definitely gives you that starting point to get back up to the 10% and to do what you need to do to get to where you want to be. So there might not be an immediate benefit, but I think there's always a benefit to planning out the future.
Just to kind of add that clarification with the housing production plan, without a housing production plan, if the town achieves 2%, we have some leverage to make a decision on whether to accept the next project for that year. With a housing production plan that's approved, it's the same 2% limit. In order to get to that 1% or that 0.5%, we have to have it certified, which is another process which requires us to identify a project and then permit it. So it's a little bit more tricky than just writing it, and the housing production plan gets approved by selectmen and planning board. The certification process gets approved by the state, and we have to show that we've made progress.
And then you got to build them. Any further? Come on. We have some big choices to make. We can,
I'll ask you a question. It'll be rephrasing Mary Ann Norton's, Rick Novak, 46 East Mill Road. For a town like ours that's in the under 5% category, small town, there are a bunch of those, we're not the only ones, all water, all well water, all sewer. What I thought I heard Mary Ann asking was, what's the likelihood that the state agency, the DEP, are going to lean our way on some issue because we've got wells and sewers and spent our own money on consultants and things like that. Because we've got wells and septic systems. And I thought I heard your answer pretty clearly being, well, you're very likely to get support in terms of review people, disclosure level stuff. Unstated was, what I think the answer is, which is, don't hold your breath waiting for your help from HAC.
So maybe I don't understand the question. Are you looking for some kind of leeway from HAC saying, well, you guys are on wells, so we're going to let you... I guess one way to say it is they're going to understand that you're on wells. If there are conditions to protect the groundwater system, and they are viable conditions, they will uphold those. I don't remember what town it was in.
Stowe.
And is that a promise?
Yeah, yes.
So there was a condition where the development impacted the groundwater significantly, so that it hurt the residents in the surrounding area. And they upheld. Was that Stowe? Yeah. Okay. So in those situations, if you can prove that the project is going to impact the groundwater significantly, that's going to it's going to jeopardize the health and welfare of the residents, that is something that is a valid local concern, because it is genuinely impacting the health and welfare.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
But, so I was wondering, I want to make a comment on that too, is the reality of it is actually, as John said, that if it was a water well servicing, the water supply for these people, as well as a groundwater discharge permit for sewage disposal, the requirement, it's not done at the time of the application. They have to go through that process and get that approved.
Right.
So the reality is, it's actually a risk, and I don't want to get into it too much, because actually, we have a project right now, actually, that we're reviewing, and that was the issue. We have the project I mentioned to you that was very, very undocumented, that I had said, don't even review it right now, we can't review it. They actually have they have public water, but their on-site disposal system needs to be reviewed by the DEP. They have done nothing of it. And so my point to them was, you have a huge risk here, actually, because if that doesn't get approved by the DEP, in mentioning the geometric constraints, this project was so tightly designed that if there was a minor change, it changed the plan significantly. And so the issue really was, and I mentioned this to the developer, You're going to have to get this approved by the DEP, the sewage disposal. You have to get the water well developed by the sewage disposal. You've left no room whatsoever. And unsaid in that is, it then comes back again to the ZBA, who now have to spend another 6 months reviewing the second one. And frankly, I didn't think it was fair, actually, for them to put them in that way. But the reality of it is, if you're asking if the DEP or the state will help you out, the DEP does have to look at it after the fact, though, so they have a condition on there. That's a pretty strict process, the groundwater discharge. It's actually a very long process. Typically takes a year for someone. No developer, I shouldn't say no, typically a developer will not initiate that process unless they know the project is approved. That's usually a year-long process, actually, to go through DEP groundwater discharge. You have to model the groundwater, develop impacts. So it may come out a year later that actually there was an impact that they haven't told you about while it's being, during the process of the groundwater discharge. But if you have a condition in there, like the condition, quite frankly, in this permit is very simple. Applicant shall secure a valid groundwater discharge permit suitable to the DEP, and actually the Board of Health in this town looks at it as well, such that the design intent of this project is unchanged. Pretty high bar, actually.
So in a case like that, the developer and the town have a large incentive to review it
Yes.
correctly first.
Exactly,
so
and that
they
was my
don't-
point, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
risk to them to do that.
Yeah, and who wants to spend a lot of money and then not get it?
Yeah,
So
and
there's
then
a
the time
big
to
incentive.
come back again and go through the process, and I
Yeah.
think there's a level of ill will the second time you're around, quite frankly.
So there's ways to, that are there for all good reasons to deny or block or inhibit a project. There's also, getting back to sort of the maybe it's a bigger picture, but I'm thinking about how do we deal with what's in the pipeline now? How do we, how does the housing partnership develop a long-term plan for when the census changes in 2020? And we've got an opportunity relative to the stuff that's in the pipeline, relative to what may be added to it. In steering those things, there's things we've mentioned, a local initiative, or a friendly 40B, or just working with these things as they come and react to them, or taking our own initiative. One opportunity we have is to look at ways to aggressively either do it ourselves or work with somebody to develop affordable housing at a different rate than a 40B, and at an accelerated rate, or all affordable, that sort of thing. These are things that are opportunities that we, the town, need to figure out how we want to approach. So we're approaching 2 hours. I think we should plan to, I'm really hoping there'll be another question. Adam?
The new bill S3211, is that germane here, which overhauls zoning laws?
The Zoning Reform Act,
Yes.
that would not apply to this chapter 40B.
Doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Yes, Brad?
Brad Panther, 127 Western Avenue. From a traffic safety standpoint, how much love do you get from HAC?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends.
No, it's an odd answer, because what I'll say is because typically they give a traffic analysis, and people show up at the hearings, and actually it is greatly influenced at the hearing when people show up. As a conversation I mentioned, we need a sidewalk, you don't understand the traffic,
Yeah.
you know, this and so on and so forth. The town hires a peer review consultant to look at that, and most of the time there's not full agreement, quite frankly. Sometimes there is, but in my experience is there is not full agreement on. I actually been on projects before where the traffic consultant didn't realize the proximity of a school route that was sort of really more known to the town people. That, by the way, actually, there's a school, kids go down this road. A traffic consultant doesn't pick that up, so when people come out and mention that, it's very important. But unless it's a significant traffic, issue of probably beyond what we're talking on the scale of these projects, I've never really seen a traffic issue.
Yeah, I mean, the traffic issues are usually not the safety type thing. I mean, not having a sidewalk is not generally considered something that is valid local concern to the level of not having affordable housing.
But accessibility for emergency response.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right, something like that,
That's the
where,
huge trump card.
well, because if there was something to happen at the subdivision, a fire were to start, and fire trucks can't get down the road because there's a tree in the middle of the way, that's a significant hazard.
Not to add to prolong it, but actually, just as an example, there was a project recently in Foxborough where there was significant, near, I don't know, people, near 140, it's like Cabot Forest Boulevard, there's a hotel, there's a large development behind it, we reviewed it. There was a traffic consultant on board that reviewed it as well, had issues. There were significant comments about that area and the traffic, whether it should be signalized, whether the roadway that the development was going to be proposed is currently two-way, should it be restricted to one-way? Nothing got changed on that, because they didn't have the documentation to demonstrate that it was necessarily needed. And so if it's just someone's opinion that they want it, it really has to be demonstrated. So that's the last project I can think of significant a traffic issue that rose to the fact that there were actually state representatives writing letters of support to the town saying, you really got to look at this road, because they'd heard from so many constituents, but I don't believe anything significant really.
To the extent that a road is already
there,
but not in great shape.
Right, and this was more traffic delays, what this was going to add to the light, but that can be re-signalized. They introduced a queuing lane. There was mitigation incorporated to the project that was credible, that was going to address the issues.
Let me ask maybe one last question. This one's probably a little bit easier, but I'm going to ask you guys, but I'm also going to ask folks here. We can look at this pipeline that we presented and try to get to 10% all at once. We can look at it and say, maybe we should try to get to 0.5% or get the minimum that gives us some control. Or we can work someplace in between. Are there other options we should ask? So I'll ask you guys, and then I'll ask you guys. Which do you think we ought to do?
No.
It's a little bit easier than that traffic question.
Yeah, that's a...
I mean, in terms of solving the problem, getting to the 10% is the better thing to do, because then you're not under any other time constraint to then move forward with other projects in a year or two. That's obviously hard, and it's going to be all at once and can be taxing on the services. So in that sense, trying to take it project by project in a longer time period might be better if you're going to be able to upgrade the services to then meet the 10% eventually. I'm not in the position to say what's best for the town, because I've not...
You consultant by any chance?
I don't have the knowledge that you guys do in terms of the services and what the town can handle, but if you have the ability to meet 10% and not suffer too many impacts, that would obviously be the best way to go, because then you're done. But that's very rarely the case, especially in a small town when you're putting that many housing units and that many people. There's going to be impacts. So it's really what's palatable for the town and what the town can handle in terms of how many people per year, how many new housing units per year, what the town services can provide, that type of thing.
This is being recorded, so I'm not going to write it on the wall, but that's a key question, is to measure, how do we forecast and model the impact of doing it all at once and compare it to the impact of trying to do a much slower but an effective approach that the state would accept as a safe harbor route.
Right.
Or some hybrid in between. That modeling of the impact, I think, is a key question.
And not only that, going back to what John said before, is I think the production plan is actually important, because it's looking out to the future as well, so if you address it all at once, you still have to address it again in the future, so you should have the plan that I think that was presented before here to get something like that underway as well, yeah.
Okay.
I just think, one more thing, sorry. The key to either going quickly with the 10% or slowly is it's a comprehensive effort. You need to make sure that even if you are taking your time introducing fewer units at a time, the services need to be upgraded to eventually meet the point where you want to end, which is generally 10% in around that area. It's not going to serve the town well by going slowly and not comprehensively working on the rest of the issues.
Okay, so, we've heard from our consultants. How many people would, I'll ask the same questions, and as you know from the planning board's townwide survey, there's questions, this is a multiple choice thing. You can pick, let's just do this all at once. You can pick some kind of in-between. You can pick the minimum that gives us some safe harbor control. And then, as you know from our townwide survey, there's also need more information.
It sounds like with the number of projects that we're looking at that are either already in the pipeline or projected to be in the pipeline, this decision may be taken out of our hands before we can even act on it. You know, if all of those projects go through, it's going to happen all at once, whether we want it to or not. Am I wrong? I mean, I'd like to.
If I knew how projects were going forward, I would still be doing project management. That's certainly an option, and that may be what happens, but it may not be. And these things are, to me, things are negotiable, and who knows? I think no good developer wants to propose a project that they don't want to do. It's not a viable option. And no good developer wants to do a project that's going to be a failure. And we certainly have a concern about that. So I think we should try to answer this question. And it's not binding. And it's just a sense of where we are. The housing partnership meets regularly and are working on this to develop a housing production plan. It's just an idea of kind of where we are, I think, is the reason for the question.
Can I also address
Yeah.
it a little bit? Also, I think that it's not black and white, right? I mean, by the letter of the law, I suppose if all the applications came in at the same time, you know, how much control do you have? Because the ZBA can't say, well, we just don't like that one, right? I think that's kind of your concern. It's like, well, when a 40B comes in, they can request waivers for local bylaws and depending on how friendly or not they are, they can be aggressive in trying to override the town's wishes. But I also think it's not so cut and dried that there's nothing that the town can do, especially in a town like ours with our private water and private septic infrastructure. There are valid local concerns, significant local concerns that can be brought and that can be raised on each project, because all of them, especially when they get bigger, those concerns become magnified. So I would say that is a concern, but at the same time, I think we as a town have to go forward trying to articulate a vision of what we want to happen as far as meeting this mandate. And then as the projects come in and whether they fit or don't fit, we're just going to have to manage them as we go. That's at least my vision of that.
I think you're going to bias the vote. Frank?
Frank, yes, South Main Street. Depending on when these projects, you know, the applications come in, even if one comes in before another, you have to have it done within 180 days. But you have the ability to fast track ones that you like so that they go to the approval stage before another one?
There's no requirement that has to take 180 days.
So you could favor one project that you think would fit. And
You,
then get that on the docket first.
you want to give it the proper review that
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
takes, but there's no reason, I mean, it's a very...
I think the answer is going to be
But-
the examples you've given. If a project comes in, it's very well prepared, it's probably a lot easier to process.
Exactly,
So-
exactly. If they've addressed all the issues, if they come in addressing all the issues that the town has commented on, that takes a significant
Just
amount of
wanted
time.
to make one clarification. I mean, the planning board's up here in part because we are looking at the plan for the whole town and working on a general plan right now, but, and the housing partnership is, works in conjunction with Board of Selectmen and Planning Board for writing the housing production plan and a vision for town, but 40Bs do not go before the Planning Board, 40Bs only go before the Zoning Board of Appeals in the process. So we would not, other than all boards in town, when a project is submitted to town, every board has an ability to give their input to the Zoning Board of Appeals, but the project itself does not come before the Planning Board or the others.
All right. So I guess I'll ask the question, how many people think we need more information? Okay, how many people think we should go for 10%? And the minimum, most people, and some hybrid, I guess, was the other option. Pretty clear. Okay, thank you, thank you. I think, any other questions? Ben?
I was just going to make a comment as I'm not a resident, I'm the developer, I'm the Eagle guy, but with your current restrictions and the fact that you do have private wells, it's making you, your projects are going to be launched to a larger size because it's, as I found out, not profitable to do a 30-unit project. If you're going to get pushed into larger regulations, state regulations for your septic system, state regulations for your water supply system. That's just a reality of being in a well protection zone. So Sherburne, as I said before, unlike a lot of other towns, has 10, 12, 15, 20 acre parcels available for under $1 million. They're all on it. There's a dozen at least that I've looked at that have approached me. So those projects aren't going to be 30-unit projects because of your wells. They're going to end up as larger projects or not at all. So it goes a little bit to the growth as I see it, just my opinion as a developer, is that it's very difficult to do a 10, 12, 15, 18 unit project on 3, 4, 5 acres when you have wells and septic. So you will not generally see that type of project in my opinion.
Okay. Paul?
If you're about to adjourn, before you adjourn, I want to thank the planning board for hosting this thing. I want to thank Beals and Thomas and both of you for coming here, helping us get informed. The better educated we are, the more information we have, the better we're going to be able to deal with all of this stuff. And thank everybody for coming.
Well said. Well said. Okay, thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.